Nicholas, a very good morning to you, and condolences as well, because you knew Denis Goldberg very well growing up. Just give us an idea of your relationship with him and just the time that you spent and just what stands out for you at this time.
Good morning to you and good morning to your listeners. I mean, if I first can start by saying, this is a sad day. It's a sad loss for the country. And what's more, it's almost the severing of ties with that period, the Rivonia period. I mean, Denis was the last surviving Rivonia trialist who had been arrested at Liliesleaf. Of the Rivonia trialists, now we're only left with Andrew Mullanganey and one of the lawyers, Dennis Cooney. So we're coming to the end of a very unique link and connection to our past. Just like when people talked about the last surviving World War I veteran. This is the same sort of magnitude that we're talking about. That connection, physical connection, is almost dead. But yes, let me talk a bit more about him. I'd like to start with an anecdotal story, which for me, to some degree, sums up Denis. When I put on the Rivonia trial reunion in 2001, and he came to the house at the time, when we hadn't started the project, and I'd walked through the house with him, and we stopped, and there was a photograph, a historical picture of the property. And he stared at it, and he was looking at it, and I was expecting some very powerful words to come out of his mouth, because you have to contextualize it, but this was the first time that he'd been back there since his arrest on the 11th of July, 1963. So I was waiting very expectantly, and he turned to me and he said, "Oh, look, there's my combi." And that was it. That he was so mesmerized by his combi. That was the only comment that he made. In some degree, that summed up the uniqueness of this individual. Yeah. I mean, he showed no rancor, he showed no anger, but he was a man of passion, he was a man of commitment, he was a man that held and steadfast to the principles and the ideals of what the liberation struggle was about, the ideals of what they wanted to achieve.
And Nicholas, we know he held on to those right until the very end, and we know he was very critical of what was happening within the movement, what was happening within the ANC right up until the end. And I wonder what his thoughts would have been, as to how they're handling the current crisis that we find ourselves in this country, that the world finds itself in at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And he was very, very close to your father. They were very good friends. And just if you can give us some idea of that relationship, because that is how you came to know him as a person.
Well, I really didn't. Look, I mean, Denis and my father were colleagues, were liberation colleagues, activists. I got to, so at the time in the UK, when he had returned, he came to the UK after his release. So I didn't really get to know him properly during that period. When I really got to know Denis was from 2001 onwards, when I had very strong links with him because of the Liliesleaf Legacy Project, and we interviewed him a lot, and I got to know him, and I got to appreciate and understand that the fire of and passion for equality, for human rights, that people should be treated equally, that saying by Martin Luther King that one should not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, burned fiercely within Denis. It was something that he firmly and was committed to. I mean, if I can give a couple of stories with regard to what he was saying about being on trial. And the one story that stands out is that he's sitting there and he's recounting how he's listening to Nelson deliver his "I am prepared to die for" speech. And he's talking about how passionate, how commanding, and how strong Nelson is in the dock, giving this speech. And then he suddenly says, when Nelson comes to the point and says, "My Lord, these ideals are which I'm prepared to die for," he suddenly says, he kind of bolts up and realizes that Nelson has just committed us and volunteered us to death without consulting us, he says. And a kind of wry smile comes across his face. And then from there he goes on to say, I was filled with elation. I was filled with pride and joy. And I think that highlights and expresses the degree to which he was willing to go for those ideals that these great struggle icons epitomized.
Thanks very much for that, Nicholas. Thanks so much. And I suppose in this time where many of us are trying to cope with where we find ourselves in at the moment, stories like that will take us just that little bit further. Nicholas Wolpe, CEO and founder of the Liliesleaf Farm, just reflecting for us on the life and times of the late Denis Goldberg.